Hey guys, my name is Rob, and today we're reviewing the Mohjon, or formerly BigBig Won, Rainbow 3. This is a wireless controller compatible with PC, Switch, and mobile, and it's a direct follow-up to the Rainbow 2, which was very popular, though not quite as popular as Mohjon's Blitz line of controllers. The two models seem very similar in form and function, but this is actually my first Rainbow controller. I somehow never picked up the Rainbow 2. I'm pretty excited to finally have my hands on one, so let's open it up and check it out. We've got a number of items in the box. First, this smaller box contains the USB-A to USB-C cable. This is a nice braided cable and feels very good, but it is only a 6-foot cable, which is fine for many people, but I still would have liked to see a 10-foot cable like we get with a lot of Pro controllers. Next, we have the wireless dongle, which has the logo on one side and also a pairing button on the end. Then we have one extra D-pad option and two extra sets of sticks. I believe the pre-installed sticks are the shortest ones, so these are the medium and long ones. Under this insert, we have just a couple of pieces of paperwork. First, a card with a QR code that will take you to Mohjon's website, and then the manual, which is a nicer booklet-style manual, so love to see that. Then lastly, we have the controller itself, which is super shiny. I assume because all of these controller manufacturers are conspiring to make it really hard for me to capture good video for reviews. In all seriousness, though, the shell look and color is a bit strange, but this is basically to accommodate the RGB lighting, and it looks much nicer with that RGB enabled. I'm not the biggest fan of RGB lighting in general, but it's a big part of the design of this controller, and it's also very customizable as far as the lighting modes and brightness, which is good because if you're like me and feel like this is a bit too much, you can pretty easily tone it down. As far as features, we have micro switch face buttons that feel and sound very good. They have a pretty short travel distance, and I'm going to say medium resistance, which is my preference, so I really like these. In general, I really love micro switch inputs, which is going to be a theme with this gamepad, as it has a whopping 16 mechanical inputs, so basically every input on the controller. This includes the D-pad, which by default has this 4-way cross installed, and it feels good, very similar to the face buttons, so again, kind of medium pressure to actuate. I say this all the time, but depending on the games you play, some people actually prefer membrane D-pads, but not me. I'm very happy to see microswitch inputs here. Next, we have the thumbsticks, which are capacitive sticks, and I believe this is Mohjon's first gamepad to feature capacitive sticks. Capacitive technology is becoming more and more common. We've seen it in several Pro controllers recently, and so far my experience has been a net positive, so I'm excited to test these out on the Rainbow 3. Other front inputs include the home button, the menu button, the view button, the screenshot or capture button. Then at the bottom of the controller, we have a row of buttons, which from left to right are the turbo button, the remap button, the macro button, and the configs or profile button. Then lastly, beside the right joystick, we have the function button, and we'll go over the uses of all of these momentarily, but I do just want to call out that I was a little disappointed to learn what the function button actually was. I was hoping it would be a programmable input instead, similar to the stick buttons on the ZD Ultimate Legend that we recently reviewed. Up top, we have the shoulder buttons, which again are micro switch, and again, I'm pleased about it. Mechanical shoulder buttons are noticeably less common than face buttons, D-pads, or even trigger stops, so really happy anytime we get a gamepad that does have them. Also on top, we have two extra bumper buttons, M3 and M4, and again, these are micro switches. These feel good, I like the position, but there is a bit of a weird issue with the right one on this unit. I'm not sure how well the microphone is or isn't picking this up, but the M4 button has a rather loud vibration when releasing, which I assume is not intended. It gives me some concern there might be something loose or not properly seated, but so far I've had no issues with it in terms of performance, but I did just want to point it out as it seems to be a potential defect. There's also a pairing button on top, which is pretty self-explanatory, but we will go over when and how to use this. Next, we have the triggers, which are dual stage Hall effect triggers, and these feel fine. I like the texture on top, but these are the kind of thinner style triggers, which I don't really love, and they're also kind of loud with very little, if any, padding. Not that that matters very much to me because I'm going to enable the trigger stops and never look back, and these trigger stops are really nice. Just like the rest of the inputs, these are micro switch, and they feel and sound great. They don't cut out quite as much pull as some others, but they feel very satisfying. They remind me a lot of the trigger stops on the Nikon Revolution X Unlimited. They don't cut out the most travel distance, but require very little pressure, and again are just really satisfying. On the back, we have our other two extra buttons, M1 and M2, and I like these a lot. Once again, yay micro switch, but also I like the placement of these buttons. My middle fingers rest precisely on these inputs, and they're very easy to actuate. I have zero complaints about these inputs. Then lastly on the back, we have the charging pin slots. As this gamepad does support wireless charging, unfortunately, I unintentionally ordered the gamepad without the charger, which I would have liked to have had for the purposes of this review and for display. I don't actually play wirelessly like ever, but when they're available, I do typically pick up charging docks anyway, so I may buy it separately at some point. Next, we'll look at customization and settings, and this is the lighting mode I settled on for now because again, the default mode is just a little bit much for me. Unfortunately, you can't really adjust lighting settings on the fly other than turning it on and off by double clicking the function button. But as I said, there are a ton of lighting customization options you can do. You just have to do those in the app, which we'll go over soon. We'll start with mode and connection options. Long pressing the home button turns the Rainbow 3 on, and by default, the controller is in X input mode. In both wired and wireless modes, you can change to switch mode by long pressing home plus A. The home light is flashing rapidly because I haven't actually paired the Rainbow 3 in switch mode yet, but you can enter pairing mode by holding the pairing button on top. And if you also press the pairing button on the dongle, you can pair to the dongle in switch mode. And switch mode with the dongle does work on both the Switch console and PC. You can swap back to X input mode by long pressing home plus B. The Rainbow 3 also supports Bluetooth in both X input and switch modes. Basically, just by pressing on the pairing button while in either mode, the gamepad will be discoverable via Bluetooth. Obviously, you'll want to be in switch mode to connect to a Switch console, but it will connect to PC in either mode, and technically to a mobile phone as well, though the manual recommends connecting to iOS and Android in X input mode. Just to note, the Rainbow 3 actually does support DS4 mode on PC as well, but it can only be enabled via the companion app. You can't do it on the fly. Next, we'll look at turbo settings, and as you could probably guess, you can enable turbo by holding the turbo button and then pressing the button you want to enable turbo for, such as the A button. The indicator light on the function button will flash to confirm turbo has been enabled, and then will also flash anytime you hold down a button that has turbo enabled. You can change the frequency or speed of turbo by holding function and pressing D-pad left, and this cycles through three frequencies, so slow, medium, and fast. You can disable turbo for a single input by holding that button and then double pressing turbo. Alternatively, you can disable all turbos at once by just double pressing the turbo button. These turbo settings work with face buttons, D-pad inputs, bumpers, triggers, and the M1 through 4 buttons. Next, we'll look at mapping the M buttons, so the two back and two extra shoulder buttons. You can program these by simultaneously pressing the remap button plus one of these buttons, and the indicator light on the function button will flash continuously to confirm the gamepad is in program mode. You'll then press the input you want to map to that specific M button, and the light will turn off. Similar to the turbo settings, if you want to unmap one of the M buttons, you just need to hold that button and then double tap the remap button. And again, similar to turbo, you can double tap the remap button by itself to clear all programmings. Additionally, you can program macros to the M buttons by simultaneously long pressing the macro button plus one of those M buttons. The function light will be in breathing mode to indicate it's ready to start recording. You can then enter whatever button combination you like and press the macro button again to save. Once you've programmed a macro, you can press the M button you assigned it to run the macro, and the indicator light will flash continuously while the macro is running. Sticking with the theme here, you can clear a macro by holding the button it's assigned to and then double tapping the macro button, or you can just double tap the macro button alone to clear all macro assignments. Next, we have profile swapping, which is super simple on the Rainbow 3. The last button on the bottom here is the configs button, and pressing that button cycles through the 4 onboard profiles. You can also reset any of these profiles by long pressing the configs button while on the profile you want to reset. A quick note that I forgot to record video of here: when the Rainbow 3 is in Nintendo Switch mode, the channel indicator light will be red. Which light is on the channel indicators will depend on what player the gamepad is assigned to. In this mode, you actually need to press the configs button once to change the channel indicator lights from red to white, and then you can cycle through profiles. If no inputs are made on the config button for 5 seconds, the light will change back to red. Next, we have dead zone adjustment, and by default, the Rainbow 3 sticks do have built-in inner dead zone, but you can swap either stick to 0 dead zone mode by pressing function plus L3 or R3, meaning they can be changed separately. Pressing function in the same stick again will swap it back to the default dead zone setting. Though changing the dead zones this way is super simple, Mohjon did set the second onboard profile to 0 dead zone mode by default, which is a nice touch. Next, we have vibration control, which is very limited. Holding function and pressing D-pad right switches the vibration on and off, but you can't adjust the intensity other than that. You only have on or off as options. If you're using a wired headset, you can also hold function and press D-pad up and down to adjust volume. Just a couple more things here. You can enter joystick calibration mode by holding menu and view for 3 seconds, and the lighting will have this kind of red breathing effect. You'll then rotate the sticks 3 to 5 times, and then press menu and view again to save. Oddly, there's no option to recalibrate the triggers on the fly. With the vast majority of gamepads, the triggers and sticks are calibrated together, but that's not the case with the Rainbow 3. You can recalibrate the gyro though. Place the controller on a flat surface and press menu and capture, and the controller will briefly enter a purple breathing mode, and then flash and return to normal when completed. And then lastly, I'm not actually going to do it right now, but you can factory reset the gamepad by long pressing the home button for 10 seconds. Now we'll take a look at the physical customization of the Rainbow 3, starting with the D-pad, and I'm going to be honest, I had a fairly difficult time removing the default 4-way D-pad. The faceplate on the Rainbow 3 is not removable, so you kind of just have to pry the D-pad off, and I had to use a plastic prying tool to get it started, and even then it was not easy. I do like the 8-way floating style D-pad and will probably use this one some, and also this one is much easier to remove obviously. I thought maybe after taking it off the first few times the default D-pad would be easier to remove, but that's not the case. I'm sure over time if you remove it often it will get easier, but it's not really a huge issue regardless. I just wanted to make sure and point it out. Then as far as the extra thumbsticks, as we assumed the pre-installed ones are the shortest ones. Then we have a set of 2 medium length and 2 long sticks. I'm actually going to leave the default short sticks on and then use thumbstick caps. Similar to the Blitz 2 and the ZD Ultimate Legend that we reviewed recently, the stick caps are an odd size, so Xbox control freaks are too small, but PS4 and 5 control freaks are a bit too large. Fortunately, I have some off-brand stick caps that I purchased on AliExpress that are allegedly made for PS4, but they're a bit smaller than control freaks, so they actually fit the Rainbow 3 just right. I'll be using one of these on the right, and then on the left I'll be using a concave Skull & Co stick cap. So this is how I'm going to run the Rainbow 3. It's basically the same setup I use for every controller. That covers all of the customization options and settings we can adjust on the controller itself, but there is more customization we can do in the app, which we'll take a look at now. This is the BigBig Won Assistant App, which oddly still hasn't been rebranded. BigBig Won changed their name to Mohjon, but the app is still the BigBig Won app, and the website is still bigbigwon.com, so I don't know. I'm sure they'll get around to it eventually. As you can see, the Rainbow 3 is connected, so we're going to click Start Configuration to get into all the options. We have several tabs on the left, and by default we're on the first tab, which is for lighting. At the top of this tab, you can change the home light color based on the connection mode. So you can set that separately for X input, switch, and D input modes. Below that, you can toggle the lighting on and off, which as we saw, you can do on the gamepad itself as well. But beyond that, the rest of these settings can only be adjusted in the app. There are several preset lighting effects, including orb, loop, flow, and pulse. And then I've also made a couple of custom lighting profiles. You can toggle custom profiles on and off, and you can do all kinds of customization on these profiles. As you can see, there are 14 different lighting zones, and you can set each zone to a specific color, including setting all of them as different colors if you want. Beyond that, you can change the custom lighting mode. So here I have it set up as static, but you can also set the custom lighting to breathing or gradient, as well as adjust the brightness and also the speed of the non-static color modes. You can add however many colors you want and apply those colors to each side, to the middle lights, or to each individual lighting zone, so the possibilities here are kind of endless. One thing to note is that the lighting settings aren't tied to a specific profile or configuration on the gamepad, so changing profiles doesn't affect the lighting at all. The second tab is for configuration, and this is where we'll edit the vast majority of the settings. As you can see, I've already made a custom configuration, which I named COD, and we can click this radio button to equip it to the current profile the gamepad is on. And we can go in and edit the settings either by clicking edit here or clicking the gear icon on top. Within the configuration, we have a few tabs. The first being for gyro settings. You can set motion control to close or off or to either joystick. When assigned to a joystick, there are just a couple of customization options. First, there's a response mode, which can be set to always on off, or keep pressing, so essentially hold to activate. And if you're using hold to activate or press for on off, you'll need to set a button to activate the gyro. Then you can also invert the X and Y axes independently, and that's pretty much it. I don't use gyro myself, but based on other controllers I've reviewed, this seems like very limited customization options, especially as there doesn't appear to be any way to adjust sensitivity. The second tab is for thumbsticks, and this tab is fairly extensive in terms of options. The left and right sticks are listed separately, and for each stick you can set the inner dead zone, which as you can see I've changed to 0, and the outer dead zone, which for now I've just left at the default of 5. Below that you can customize the response curve, and then down at the bottom of this tab there are a few options you can enable or disable. First is rectangular mode, so if you enable this you'll have a rectangular algorithm, and if you disable it it'll be circular. I'm going to enable rectangular on the left, which is actually my preference, but also this way we can check circularity for both modes when we go into testing. Then we have DFL dynamic filter, which I don't really know what this is, but I'm going to go out on a limb here and say I probably don't want it for the games I play, because I assume whatever it is probably artificially edits or alters inputs, which, generally speaking, isn't the best idea for FPS games. Same with dynamic calibration. I assumed that this setting would automatically recalibrate the center position of the sticks when they're not being pressed, which I don't really want to happen while playing FPS games. But I actually tried testing this, and it doesn't appear that it does that, so I'm not really sure what it does. At the very bottom of this tab, you can also invert the X and Y axes. The next tab is for triggers, and there's very little here. You can set the min and max dead zone, but realistically, what else do you really need for triggers? Then we have key maps, which is where you can remap the inputs, and this is much more extensive than mapping on the gamepad for a couple of reasons. First, you can remap most of the inputs on the controller, pretty much everything except for the home and function, and the bottom row of buttons such as turbo and macro, etc. And then also you can map keyboard inputs to all of these buttons. It's a bit more limited than we've seen with some other Pro controllers, specifically because you can't map mouse inputs, but it's still fairly extensive and a great option to see. Then we have vibration settings, which again are more extensive than what you can do on the fly. Rather than just setting the vibration to on or off, here you can adjust the left and right grips independently, and you can set it from 20, which somehow is actually 0, to 255, so a very wide range of intensity. That covers the configuration options, and I'm going to hit save up in the right corner, and if this were a new configuration, this is where it would ask me to label it, but since we're editing a configuration I had previously made, it's not going to prompt me to give it a name. The next tab on the left is for macro settings, and once again, setting macros in the app gives you more customization options than doing so on the controller. You can still only assign macros to the M1 through M4 buttons, but you can set separate macros for short tapping and long pressing each of those buttons, or you can set tap or long press to cycle through different macros. So you can actually assign two macros to each button if you have a need for that. And when setting up macros, you can also set the interval for each input, as well as the interval between inputs. The next tab is titled Debug and has a few universal settings. First is connection mode, and this is where you can enable DS4 mode, which they're calling DSE, as well as X input and switch modes. Then we have step accuracy, and this is actually the thumbstick bitrate. For whatever reason, they've always had this labeled really weird in the app, but essentially the highest bitrate is adaptive, and then for the numbered options, high is low and low is high. So if you go all the way down to the bottom, you're going to get 8-bit sampling and a standard resolution of 128. I prefer higher resolution, so I'm leaving this on adaptive. Then we have the return or polling rate, which by default is set on 2000 Hz, but you can adjust it as low as 250 Hz. Next we have calibration, which appears to be the same calibration options as on the gamepad, so you have the sticks and the gyro, but then when you go into stick calibration on the app, it does also prompt you to calibrate the triggers. Then we have an option to swap the inputs of the left stick and D-pad. The smart base start stop, which just means setting the controller to auto wake or sleep when placed on or removed from the charging base. We have a link to the product manual, and there's a giant button at the bottom to restore factory settings. The last tab is for firmware upgrades, and it does warn you that the gamepad needs to be connected via USB cable in order to do an update. And after the update, the gamepad will need to be recalibrated. It also shows you the most recent version on the right. Then under the gamepad image, you can see the current firmware version you're on. Then in the bottom left corner, we have a testing page where you can test the sticks and all of the inputs on the controller. And that pretty much covers all the features of the app, so now we'll jump into some testing. We'll start with polling rate, and we're doing wired first. As we saw in the app, the polling rate is adjustable, and I do have it set at 2000 Hertz, and we're actually getting noticeably higher than that at about 2250, which is great. Jitter is also low, so overall this looks very good. Next, we'll look at wireless polling, and I assume this will be the same or very similar. And it is. Again, it's noticeably higher than the advertised polling rate at 2230, and again, low jitter, pretty much the same as the wired jitter, which is not always the case, so great to see. Next, we'll look at resolution, and Mohjon had advertised 8000 level resolution with the capacitive sticks on the Rainbow 3. I didn't get nearly that high in hand testing, but I did get 3264, which is still very, very high, and of course, there's a ton of room for error in hand testing resolution. I wish I had a more accurate way to test this, but at this time I just don't, but it does at least give me an idea of the resolution range. Next, we'll look at gamepad tester, and there are a couple of things to note here. First of all, you'll likely notice that the sticks are not bouncing back to a consistent resting point, which is not really surprising as the dead zones are set to 0, but I did enable dynamic calibration on the left stick, and I checked during this test to make sure it was still enabled, and it is, so either I was mistaken about what dynamic calibration actually does, or it's just not working. Regardless, these numbers are very small, and I have no drift in game whether dynamic calibration is or isn't enabled. As far as circularity, I have the left stick set on rectangular algorithm and the right set on circular. On the left stick, we're getting 10.2% error rate, and the shading is okay, though not perfect, as it does appear the outer dead zone is slightly wider on the left side of the stick than on the right. But it's not necessarily a concern, especially since I can say that I've played with this gamepad quite a lot, and the thumbsticks feel very good. The right stick shows 2.8% error rate, and as we can see, this is because the outer dead zone does extend slightly beyond the testing area, but it's very even across the board, so no concerns about this. Lastly, just because people often ask me for it, I wanted to share the latency testing results from Gamepad LA. To be clear, I did not test this myself, I don't have the equipment to do so, but based on the user results posted on Gamepad LA, the Rainbow 3 has very good latency numbers, especially in wired mode. So, conclusions. Jumping straight to the point, I really like the Rainbow 3 quite a bit more than I expected to for various reasons. Not that I didn't think I would like it, I was very excited to get my hands on it, and I've had good experiences with this company in the past, particularly with the Blitz 2, which was my main controller for quite a while. My biggest hesitation with this gamepad was the capacitive sticks, and it's partially because the technology is so new. This is only, I think, the third controller I've tested with capacitive sticks, and mostly I just didn't think it was likely that they would stand up to the TMRs and the Blitz 2. And honestly, I'm not sure they do. I think the Blitz 2 TMRs, which I've long said I believe are the best sticks on the market, are still slightly better than the Rainbow 3 sticks, at least for me. I reserve the right to update my opinion on that over time, because just like it took me a while to adjust to magnetic Hall effect and TMR sticks in the beginning, I do think it's at least possible I'll adjust to capacitive sticks as well. But despite that, if I had to pick one of these controllers, I'd go with the Rainbow 3. The main reason is because it's just decidedly more comfortable in hand. Realistically, the only reason I moved on from the Blitz 2 in the first place is because I just never really found it comfortable to hold. I never adjusted to the odd shape of the gamepad, and even though they don't visually look all that different in terms of shape, the Rainbow 3 is infinitely more comfortable. Oddly, I also prefer the triggers on the Rainbow 3. I was not one of those people who was upset about the lack of linear triggers on the Blitz 2. I was fine having just the mechanical quick triggers, but I prefer the feel of these trigger stops on the Rainbow 3. Again, they remind me a lot of those on the Nacon Revolution X Unlimited, so if you happen to own that gamepad, that's what I would compare the feel of these two. Aside from that, the Rainbow 3 and Blitz 2 have very similar features and components and function very much the same. I do prefer the looks of the Blitz 2, especially the Dynasty Warriors version, and I still love this gamepad, but especially for long gaming sessions, I think the Rainbow 3 is just a better choice for me. I've been using it a ton over the last 3 weeks or so, pretty much just going back and forth between this gamepad and the ZD Ultimate Legend. And although I do think the Legend is the better gamepad, the Rainbow 3 is at worst in my top 3, and it's also noticeably cheaper at $79.99 versus $99.99 for the Ultimate Legend. Again, personally, I would still rank the Ultimate Legend at number 1, but if for some reason that gamepad doesn't appeal to you, I do think the Rainbow 3 is a very solid controller. And the Rainbow 3 is also readily available on Amazon, whereas the Ultimate Legend has been in and out of stock on there. I hope this video helped you out, and if so, please subscribe if you haven't already. Likes are also appreciated, and I do try to react and respond to as many comments as possible. I'll be doing more reviews regularly, so I hope to see you back here again soon. Thanks for watching.